I've read a lot of people write very anxious things because they love the original version of this movie, the Swedish film, and I get that, because remakes are often a business decision and not a creative one. The final film sometimes reflects that, often reflects that. If you're talking smack about this film, though, and dismissing it as just another remake, it's because you haven't seen this film yet. Today we've got some of the cast here, along with writer-director Matt Reeves, and it is my sincere belief that by the time we're finished here today, you'll understand how special this one really is. So let me bring out the director of Cloverfield, Matt Reeves. I'd also like to introduce Kodi Smit-McPhee, who you may have seen in The Road last year. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce one of the great character actors working today to you, Richard Jenkins. And I know you guys are excited for our next guest because I've seen about 30 hit girls since I've been here on Thursday. Ladies and gentlemen, Chloe Moretz. So Matt, a big part of why this film works, or a big part of why we hope this film works, is the casting of the movie. The kids in particular, it's very important that you get that relationship right. Can you talk about the process of finding Kodi and Chloe and putting them together?
Sure. I mean, the thing about it is that, you know, the original film is such a beautiful film, and specifically what makes that work is that it's got an extraordinary story about these people. And you know, in doing the search, I kind of felt like if we couldn't find the kids, we really didn't have a movie, because it's an adult story, it's a complex emotional story, and yet it falls on two 12-year-old kids to play. And so we just started reading people. There was a scene that I had written in the script where I felt that Owen, as he's known in our film, his Oscar in the original, that he would you know, that he would essentially react to discovering that Abby, in our story, from Ellie, from the original, that she was a vampire, and that he would be lost and reeling. And I was inspired by this scene in Rosemary's Baby where the camera just holds on Mia Farrow when she's freaking out late in the movie, and it's just her on the phone, and she's having a nervous breakdown. She's falling to pieces. And I thought, wouldn't it be great to see Owen go through that? And then the moment I was done writing it, I thought, who am I going to find to do that? And we started reading people, and a lot of young actors came in, and you know, people are playing different things. And then Kodi comes in, and I hadn't seen The Road, but I heard he was extraordinary in it, and I had seen Romulus, My Father, and he's terrific in that movie. But he was 10 when he did that movie. Is that right? Were you 10? 9. Okay, so this character was older, and I thought, well, who knows? And he's Australian, and so he was so amazing in that scene that literally I said, oh, well, that's it, we have to stop. That's who we have to cast. And now I know we can do this movie because he can play that role. And the same thing happened with Chloe. Chloe came in, and I was looking for someone who could play that role, but who would not play a vampire, per se. Because the role really, the difficulty of this story is it's about how hard it is to be a vampire, really. It's about sort of not being happy about it. It's not romantic at all. And when Chloe came in, we really explored a lot of stuff. I found these photographs by a photographer named Mary Ellen Mark, and there was a picture of a homeless family that she documented, and their names were ironically the Dam family. And there was a little girl at the center of it, and she had this look of defiance in her face. And she also was holding her younger brother's little hand so protectively, and yet you could tell that she was a very, very sort of wounded soul. And when Chloe came in, we explored that. I showed her the pictures, and she showed how beautifully vulnerable she could be and how tough she could be. And then when it came to it, she was totally willing to dive in and be primal. And I hadn't seen Kick-Ass, I hadn't seen The Road, nobody would show me anything. So I was just like, you know what, these kids are amazing. And then the cool thing was we started shooting, and all of those movies came out, and people were like, wow, those kids are amazing. I was like, yes, they are amazing. And the last piece of the puzzle was to find someone who would play Hakan. And I was very fortunate, when Overture approached me, they also said, hey, will you come to an evening that we're having for Richard Jenkins, who's nominated for an Academy Award for The Visitor. And I thought he was so amazing in that film. And then I had the pleasure, my wife and I were talking to him that evening, and he was so lovely. And I was about halfway through the script, and my wife turned to me and she said, "That's him. Did you see his eyes?" And I was like, I became obsessed. I was like, we have to get Richard Jenkins for this. And I was really fortunate that when he read the story, that he responded to it and agreed to be in the film. And so really, this is my dream cast, and it was such a beautiful experience to work with them. They're so amazingly talented. And Lindquist's story is such a complex and beautiful story, and the relationships are so critical to it, and to have actors of this caliber play those roles is, I can't wait for you guys to see the movie. The thing is, the 80s in Sweden were a specific cultural experience, and I wanted to set it in the 80s in the United States, because that was sort of what I grew up with, sort of Reagan America, a time when they sort of talked about, he made these sort of announcements about how there was the evil empire, and how evil was something that was the Soviets, it was out there, the others, and that America was fundamentally good. And I wondered how a 12-year-old boy who is bullied so terribly that he has fantasies of murder and revenge, and falls in love with a very, very violent, primal, but also, heartbreakingly tender vampire, how that person would deal with sort of living in a world where his feelings were not acceptable and not okay. And so that was really, one of the things I loved about the movie and in the book was this sort of sense of this sort of the virgin snow and the blood, and that sort of contrast. So I really wanted to keep that snowy locale. And the original was set in a place called Blackburg, which is where Lindquist grew up. And it was basically a planned community. And we, of course, in the United States have that. It's suburbia. It's like, all of those communities and all of those Spielberg films. And the movie actually weirdly reminded me, when I read the book, about sort of that sort of world, like E.T., the sort of tract housing and that kind of stuff. And so I really wanted to try and find a quintessential American community, and I wanted to set it in one that was also a snowy locale. And so when we were looking, I originally set it in Colorado, and it turned out that there were these tremendous tax incentives if we went to New Mexico. And so I was like, okay, well, I'd never been to New Mexico, and I thought that it would be sort of like, there's no snow there, it'll be just desert. How's that going to work? And then they explained to me, no, it's the high desert. It actually gets quite a lot of snow. It's John Ford country. Like, you see sort of great, grand American vistas. And then I got very excited. And actually, when I was writing the script, Drew Goddard, who wrote Cloverfield, is a friend of mine, and he's a huge fan of the original. I'm sure you guys all know him very well. He's loved here because of all of the amazing stuff that he's written, and Cabin in the Woods that he's doing, actually, which Richard did with him. And so he said to me, when I was looking for a place to set it, and I mentioned Colorado, he had gone to college there, and he said, oh, that's a perfect place to set it. And so I was like, okay, great, because I wanted it to feel sort of like a small community, a tract housing kind of community that I had grown up in, but I didn't grow up in a snowy place like that. So when he suggested that, I thought it was great. When somebody suggested New Mexico, they said, well, what about Los Alamos? And that immediately made me think, oh wait, the atomic bomb. Talk about a community that grew up sort of overnight for a very, very unusual American story. And I looked online because I wanted to know about it. And very little filming has really been done in Los Alamos. And the first thing I see, it says famous alums, Drew Goddard. And I was like, what? So I called up Drew. I said, Drew, you went to college in Colorado, but you grew up in Los Alamos? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, what about that story? And he goes, oh, yeah, that's like my childhood. You should set it there. And so that was actually why I chose it. And that's sort of how we ended up there. We were the first people to ever shoot like in Los Alamos Middle School. And it was it's an amazing place. It's got a very unique history.